right. Good evening, everybody. Justin, were you doing some push-ups?
Allegedly. I did train today, though. How about you?
I can't get out of a day of not training. So it's always something different, whether I am forest walking, which I include as, part of fitness, but typically doing some type of weight bearing activity and or cardio. Otherwise, I just literally can't get through my day. How about you?
100%. It's exactly what you said. It's not necessarily every day being some grinding catabolic workout, but sometimes it's just a movement session of any
Right.
kind, up to and including walking, stretching, mobility, whatever it is. There's a ton of ways to get after it, right?
Right.
So I get after it every day, but I don't do some massive squat workout every day. Today I did some rounds on the punching bag, though, increase that brain derived neurotrophic factor, little coordination, get some cardio on. It was a great time.
Good. Well, this is such an important topic. There's so much to talk about. We are diving today into this, I suppose, really our innovative strategy on how to harness genomic data to develop personalized health and fitness plans, uniquely tailored genetic profiles with that. So understanding your DNA and then understanding how your body's going to better respond to how you move. I mean, we're all meant to move. We both agree on this. We're all meant to push, pull, jump, squat, lift, run, and walk. But at the DNA company, we pride ourselves in the notion that, this unique customer tailored approach not only enhances the effectiveness of fitness regimens and the individual's abilities, but also optimizes health outcomes. And that's what we're talking about. First and foremost, what the heck do we want to exercise for in the first place? It's not just looking better, right? It's not just, for that matter, even feeling better in the moment. It's mental health, as you just alluded to. Exercise significantly reduces symptoms of depression and anxiety. It has an optimal, frame of mind. The idea that, you can literally use this like a drug, do something, move, get out, and as you put it, get at it, and feel better almost instantly. It's a drug. It's got chronic disease prevention. Engaging physical activity helps to prevent numerous chronic diseases like heart disease, stroke, diabetes, even cancer. So we've got bone health in there, right? Prevention of osteoporosis. We've got the whole longevity factor. There's some life expectancy studies potentially adding 7 or more years to our life. Sleep quality. Frankly, it's another thing. I don't know about you. I can't sleep anywhere near as optimally unless I feel sort of that deep, sort of nice, sort of pain almost in my muscles. Like I've done something. Like I've done hard work that day. I can't feel well rested. And of course, there's also immune health and sexual health. There's so many reasons. I'll tell you mine. And then everyone wants to, hear why you do and why we make these sort of custom recommendations. But I imagine myself at the age of 100, um, able to lift groceries, play with my grandchildren, climb stairs without feeling winded or, risking any major injury. And this isn't wishful thinking. It's a realistic goal. We know centenarians, people that live beyond 100, they do this, and it's made possible through regular physical exercise. So it's not just about looking good or staying slim. It's about ensuring that as we age, our bodies and our mind remain functional and as independent, preventing frailty as best as possible. So I, in my mind, work my way backwards, 100 plus, and to get there, what do I need to do on a regular basis today in order to be able to achieve that? Why do you do it, Jess? Why do
Man,
you
I
do it?
look at it almost like, sorry, there
Yeah,
we
yeah,
go.
that was my like. What's your motivation on a daily basis? Because I know you exercise daily. You're a power lifter. There's not a day that goes by that you're not doing something. So what motivates you?
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I kind of look at it like in the financial world, they talk about assets versus liabilities, right? And to me, it's like if you're going to invest in anything as an asset, you should invest in yourself, your own body, right? Your own capacity. So I can either be an asset or a liability to everyone
Right.
in my life, right? And the quality of man I choose to bring to this table daily is what kind of defines that. So to me, I train because I ask myself, what would create a high value man? Everyone in my life benefits from me being a higher value man. And strength is one of those things where it's like, who does get the pickle jar open, right? You got to be the guy that gets the pickle jar open. That's one of those things, right? If you can't do that, then who's going to do it? So I try to do it because it makes me worth more. It makes me more valuable to everyone who depends on me. So it's really selfless in its own right. And then there's a selfish component too, that I just enjoy looking good. I do. I prefer to look good than not look good. And that's something that's difficult to admit, but it makes me better. And then I also look better, feel better. Everything about this presence that I have with my clients, with my family members, it all stems back to my daily activities. How much am I investing into myself? Are you an asset or a liability? Fitness is a big part of that.
Huge. I love what Marissa is saying. Tonight, folks, we want to encourage you to ask questions, weigh in our chat. We want this to be as interactive as possible. Hear your stories. Marissa is saying she agrees with what we're saying. Her dad's 93, still working, and has been physical his whole life, still doing all the things that needs to stay healthy. And so is her mom, rather. And I don't know if you heard the story of Fauja Singh. You hear about this guy, marathon runner at 100 years old?
Yeah,
His ability actually wasn't the result of any sort of, that we know, extraordinary genetics. They count, but a lifetime of staying active. By the way, he didn't start marathon running until his late 80s. I think it was 89 years old, proving, first of all, that it's never too late to start physical activity. But he actually ran, which is where I'm speaking to everyone from tonight, Toronto, run the Toronto Marathon at the age of 100. And funny enough, the Guinness Book of World Records actually didn't put him in because he didn't have full proof. He had a passport saying that he was born in 1911, I believe it was, but didn't have a full proof because they didn't collect it in India in those days, birth certificates, I suppose. But anyways, ran a full marathon at the age of 100. Never too late to start. It is exercise that is the single most powerful tool that we have to ensure that these later years are vibrant and active. Bottom line. So our goal tonight, by the way, everybody, and again, we want you to weigh in, questions, give your anecdote, your stories. It's not only to inspire and empower you with the understanding of tools that you need to sustain this physical activity and what you need to do, but it's the idea that everyone is unique and you can all understand what it is that you might want to do and focus on with this insight from genetics and what we have to offer that way. But with that said, can we just have this conversation about exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve? I mean, maybe from the anatomical, physiological level, because it's not just to be cardiovascularly fit, as it were, or again, to fit into our favorite pair of genes. But what are we trying to achieve really at the anatomical, maybe at the cellular level, just to frame it up for people before we get into some of the genes and customization that we do at the DNA company?
I think we're trying to achieve the most optimal state possible. And this kind of lends itself to a conversation about longevity versus performance, because they are actually very different things. And oftentimes, the more you go toward performance, you do have to rob a little bit from the longevity factor. I think that you want your entire body, which is comprised of multiple smaller systems, all working in unison, right? We talk about the kinetic chain, the ability to generate strength from the ground up. That can only happen if your body is actually functioning as one unit properly. So I think that we want to be strong. I think we want to have good posture, right? Posture matters. We want good body language. We want cells that are efficiently dividing and all these different things. That's why we have to have a personalized approach, right? Because if we're just doing any X bodybuilding program and our genes are not kind of laid out that way, we're going to default ourselves into not having the most efficient system that we possibly could. So yeah, we want good posture, we want good bone density, we want healthy muscles that are filled with mitochondria, and we want a cardiovascular system that allows us to climb up and down the stairs daily without panting, so to speak.
Absolutely. And so it begs the question, sort of, how did we get to where we are today? Modern lifestyle and health challenges that we have. Sedentariness, I think, is right up there at the top of the list. It's led to this obesity epidemic, significantly impacting health globally, worldwide. We've got problems everywhere. It's an epidemic, potentially pandemic proportions. Even studies from the World Health Organization highlight how sedentariness, and it's a behavior, really, it is linked, and we'll talk about that as it pertains to cognitive function, some of the genes that we look at there, and reward and physical activity. But it's linked to increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, premature death. That's what, and we know that through natural movement, biologically, humans are designed to move. We've said that, and integrating movement into your daily life is not just about exercise. It's about, and has been for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, about survival and health. Our ancestors used to move 6 to 9 miles every single day. In stark contrast to what our day average is these days, which is barely half a mile, maybe a kilometer. So at the bottom line, is sort of one of the things we want to get out tonight is, what is it really doing for us, other than all of those things that you've just said? And that is, we are trying to, through exercise, enhance muscle and muscle metabolism. That's really what this is, a forgotten organ. Think about this. There's a neurologist for the brain, cardiothoracic surgeon, a cardiologist for the heart. There's a gastroenterologist for the guts, right? There's a hepatologist for the liver. There's an osteopath and all kinds of other subspecialties for bone health, chiropractor, et cetera. Who deals with muscles? Who out there's actually when you develop loss of muscle mass and empower, two different things, your muscles become more of, I suppose, a ribeye kind of steak by analogy, marbled, fattened. So again, it's not, you could be, what we've talked about in previous podcasts, but you can be skinny fat, you can be like thin, and still have lots of marble and striation in the muscle. But what we're losing in this day and age is the ability for the muscle to become that sink, metabolic sink that it's supposed to be, for sugar, and for caloric burn. So this whole concept of basal metabolic rate, so like the concept that what you burn on average, the amount of calories you burn in a given day when you're not exercising, has significantly reduced no matter what your size is. So part of the objective here through customized routines is to ramp up, right, the literal leanness and activity of your muscle mass. We're so disproportionate. Like the average guy, without getting to very specific metrics, the average guy should be somewhere between, that 10 and 20% fat tissue. Doesn't matter what you weigh on the scale, right? How tall you are, how old for that matter, about 10 to 20%, roughly, fat tissue percentage. We're walking around this planet, most of us guys, at 30, 40% fat tissue. This is the endocrinological disruption, this percentage of fat that is primarily at the basis of insulin resistance, insulin insensitivity, diabetes, heart disease, and so forth. So this is why we want exercise. And if we dove down into the muscle, what are we really talking about when it comes to the substructure or the organelles? We're talking about mitochondria, right? We're talking about enhancing mitochondrial function. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, your muscles are hugely dense in mitochondria. Your brain and your muscles are pretty much the highest density there as far as mitochondria. And man, the more you rabbit hole on mitochondria, what they are and what they do, it's a direct aging factor. Like the healthier your mitochondria are, the better you're going to age. There's something called mitophagy, right, where mitochondria die off and new ones get created. And that is really directly linked to healthy aging and longevity, how good you feel while you're living as well. These are these little powerhouses within our body that give us all the ATP we need. And your brain needs ATP. Your organs need ATP. Absolutely everything requires healthy mitochondrial function. So that's why we dive into the genes and we talk about, for example, your antioxidant pathways, right? How easy is it for your mitochondria to get all gummed up with toxins? And when we weight train, for example, we actually can directly increase the number of mitochondria in the muscles, right? So it's efficiency. You're actually making it more efficient, and that lends itself to more long-term energy and better aging from there. I'm reminded of I am also something called a primal health coach, right? Like that's what my actual background is, and that's my foundation of health coaching. And we talk all about fitness in there as well, as far as like how our ancestors would have moved and things. So there's something called the primal blueprint, which is like 10 laws, quote unquote, that our ancestors would have lived by. And it includes lift heavy things, sprint once in a while, move frequently at a low pace. This is what our species is designed to do. And if we get away from that, the further away from that we get, the more this preponderance of obesity is. We have to move and we have to understand how to eat in these various things.
Absolutely. So muscle is very different than fat, fundamentally different in their function and their energy use. Mitochondria is what creates the currency of energy, ATP. There are ways in which we can enhance mitochondrial function to produce more energy, which then serves us back to the ability to make more lean and dense and mean muscle. So muscle and your brain, by the way, is also very rich in mitochondria. So these powerhouses of the cell, crucial for energy production, overall metabolism. Part of this game is increasing their ability to multiply and work. And to your point, mitophagy, or the dying off of the slow and the older ones, is important. And some of us genetically do this better than others to begin with. So muscles as an organ of longevity, the cellular differences, how we used to move, how we're moving now, all of these things factor in. Let's talk about the role of genetics in fitness. Andrew's asking us about in the chat, the Q&A. We encourage everyone to ask questions who's got them. He's asking, do we look at the myostatin gene? So we can talk about that. We don't look at the myostatin gene directly. We can talk about what that is, perhaps, and also how muscles grow in response to exercise was what he's talking about. But that's a sort of a real sort of laser-like focus in on one component or one aspect of the bigger picture, right? It's I'm not saying that gene is not important, but let's talk about how we look at the big picture when we're talking about everything from what types of exercise are fundamentally better for certain genetic types, even what macronutrients might even be better to fuel some genetic types, and even play off on the whole, cognitive or executive function component of exercise. You started off, Justin. How do you typically approach a client in your discernment of looking at their genetic type and trying to establish a customized fitness routine for them?
Yeah, so I look at a few different metrics, and just to touch on myostatin for a second. So even though we don't look at the gene specifically, I do recommend, if you suspect that it's a part of why perhaps you can't put on additional muscle mass, because myostatin, we have kind of a cap of how much muscle mass we're able to naturally put on, and myostatin represents that cap to an extent. There's actually certain species of bulls and different things that don't have any myostatin, and they're preposterously muscular. It's actually really funny. You can look it up, like
People should
bull that doesn't have myostatin, and it's unbelievable to look at. I recommend an ingredient called epicatogen. It's an extract of green tea, and it actually acts as a myostatin inhibitor, right? So it's one of those things that you could add into a stack that actually suppresses myostatin function in the body and can allow you to build more muscle, assuming you've got all of the other kind of components in place. With regard to the genes, however, I mean, what I look at is firstly the hormone pathway. I want to see how many androgens your body makes, for example. Androgens are highly potent forms of testosterone. And there's a couple of things you need to look at with that. You need to look at, for example, your SRD5A2 gene, because it's going to dictate that part of the pathway. How much androgen conversion are we getting? There's also a process in the body called glucuronidation, one of those words that we love. And it represents the clearance of things like androgens, right? So there's a family of genes called UGT family. One in particular is called UGT2B17. That'll be in your hormone pathway. If you have a couple copies of that, 2 is kind of the full version of that, you're going to be getting a lot of androgen clearance. So it's not going to stick around as long as we might hope. There's also genes associated with the androgen receptor, like AR and AndroX. If you have suboptimal versions of that, we need to find ways to activate the androgen receptor because genetically it's not happening as well as you might like. So I might take that into consideration. Let's say someone doesn't have a great androgen pathway, but they're all about putting on muscle mass. Well, we know that, for example, the legs have a lot of androgen receptors in there. So let's make sure that we're squatting. You can do things like slow negatives, where you extend the muscle at a slower rate than you would contract the muscle. That activates the androgen receptor. We can look at various micronutrient deficiencies beyond that. If you're deficient in zinc, which genetically we can look at that, it's going to play a role in your ability to put on muscle. So it's got to do with a few of those things. I always tie it back as well to the microbiome. How well can we actually synthesize proteins and what have you at the level of the gut? I think each and every one of those moving factors is going to matter. So it's not an N=1 equation with this one.
Wow. So that's a lot. And we do look at a lot. We also look at genes related to, how the cardiovascular system might do well to literally elasticity in the vessels expand and contract. And that is to say, some of us are more adapt or equipped to go from 0 to 60 better than others, to perform HIIT or high intensity interval training activity better than others. So we can get into the hormones on a much deeper level, and understand this sort of variance within the male category of androgenicity, as you're speaking to. Some of us, myself included, happen to be a little bit more on the estrogen dominant side of male hormone aptitude. I got to work harder and spend more time building my muscle mass. I got to spend more time focused on enhancing and increasing the mitochondrial function that delivers during those weight bearing exercise routines, so that I can put on that muscle mass. Because sarcopenia and or frailty is not, we think it is the underpinning physiologically as to what is causing and contributing to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, insulin insensitivity, and even cancers. So when you increase your muscle mass and when you focus on doing strength training, you're going to live a longer, healthier, better life. There was a question around routine. In sort of the average day, Ted saying, sprinting, lifting heavy items are part of 10 routines you need to be doing. What are the others? Let's go through these, because again, MoveNat or natural movement, I'm a huge believer in, as are you. We are meant to do these various movements. I'm not sure there's exactly 10 others, but what is it? How is it that you describe, to an average client what they should be doing, and then maybe describe for Ted how you can use, again, genetics to inform where their focus lies more often. And then we got to get into supplements and ingredients, because people are excited to talk about that as well.
Yeah, so I think what Ted may have been referencing there is that I mentioned the primal blueprint,
Right.
which has 10 quote primal laws. That's actually my kind of foundation of health coaching, which I obviously personalize via what we talk about, genes and gut health and these various items. So there's actually 10 primal blueprint laws. The 3 that I mentioned were to do with fitness. So I encourage everyone to Google something called the primal blueprint and look it up. It actually is a template that you can get, and it's mimicking the lifestyle behaviors of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. So it also includes eat plants and animals, avoid poisonous things, use your brain, avoid stupid mistakes. The 10 laws that effectively got us to where we are now. But the 3 that I mentioned there are move frequently at a low pace, right? Our ancestors would have done that. Lift heavy things. They didn't really have a choice but to do that. And then sprint once in a while, or run really fast once in a while, right? That's something that they would have had to do whether or not they wanted to or not, right? So those are the more fitness oriented things. With regard to how I would construct a program, I mean, we need to understand our muscles, they push and they pull, right? So we need to do full body sweeping movements to get the most use out of our body. I mentioned the kinetic chain earlier. So that's where I tend to usually recommend, with regard to weight training, more full body workouts, things where our whole body is moving as one unit, swinging a kettlebell around. It gets you the most hormone optimization, right? So you get this pulse of anti-aging hormones. It also tends to be slightly more cardiovascular, just based on the fact that so many joints are moving at once that your heart rate can't help but go up. So it equates to functional fitness. I tailor all of this to what your genetics would suggest, as far as how well do your mitochondria clear toxins. That's going to be relevant for how much cardio you should do. I look at your 9p21 gene to know your hardware that your cardiovascular system has in the first place. Then I look at your androgen profile, as I already mentioned. So those are the 10 laws. Only 3 of them have to do with fitness. It's a little bit more broad, but that's what I would look at, genetically speaking, to kind of personalize this approach.
Right. So we also look at detoxification. How well will somebody, and antioxidation, how well will somebody recover from exercise, and tailor routines around that to enhance that recovery and manage the inflammation post workout routine. You know, there are bodies out. The American College of Sports and Medicine, the ACSM, is one body that has specific breakdowns of what each individual should aim to do every week and maintain overall health and fitness. So as you've laid it out already, if we're sort of following the Paleolithic, or as our ancestors did, you do want to sprint. Everyone wants to sprint once in a while. We should all be able to push up, do pull up, jump, squat, all these different things. Some of us, though, want to be maybe running more than others. We can identify that at the DNA company through genomic analysis. Some of us want to be more focused, again, on the weight bearing routine. There are ways in which we identify these various genes. You spoke to some of them, but at the end of the day, aerobic activity, walking and running, the minimum requirement we all should be engaged in is at least 150 minutes of moderate to intense aerobic activity, at least 75 minutes probably of vigorous intensity. And I say that minimum because even those subtypes of genetic susceptibilities toward hitting aerobic activity having more sort of cardiovascular injurious potentials to them, this is the minimum, and no one, or very few people out there, are reaching this minimum. Brisk walking has to be in there, but almost doesn't count toward the muscle mass and muscle memory that we're talking about. Now, people really got to step up. So muscle strengthening activities like lifting weights, resistant bands, again, push-ups, squats, lunges, heavy gardening, that counts, by the way. And of course, as we get older, we're going to be tailoring routines, toward that, that age, and particularly gender, weight, stage of the individual. But intensities, these activities that can be performed to a point where it'd be difficult to do another repetition without help. We got to get there, right? I mean, all of us, to our own, at our own levels. And I don't think most people really know what that means. Speak to that a little bit if you can. And again, what is this exactly doing to wash over our biochemistry to allow a more balanced endocrine system, more insulin sensitive system?
So there's different rep ranges, right? As far as lifting weights, there's what's called lifting heavy, right, which would be kind of the 1 to 5 repetition range. Then there's what's called a myofibrillar hypertrophy range, which is one of those fancy words that means ripping down myofibrils in order to build muscle. That exists in about the 6 to 12 repetition range. Then beyond that, once you get over 12, if you're at like 15, 20, 25, then you're in what's called the sarcoplasmic range, which means that you're not breaking the muscle fibers down, but what you're doing is you're pumping lots of blood into the muscle and you're stretching the fascia, and that's what's actually going to shape it. That's also an endurance range, right? So you're doing so much that it's inherently cardiovascular. You're going to be doing that with lighter weights, of course, as well. So that's actually almost a way of doing cardio. I recommend dabbling in all 3 because I always refer to training as educating the nervous system as well as educating the muscular system. my goal when I work out is to educate my muscles. I want them to be intelligent and reactive. So when I lift heavy, 1 to 5, I'm pretty much maxing out. That fifth rep is like almost impossible. And when your body struggles in that way, you actually get a tremendous pulse of testosterone and growth hormone. So you get muscle growth and you get all these anti-aging benefits via lifting in that 1 to 5 repetition range. Then, if I want to actually build muscle, like most bodybuilders actually operate between that 6 to 12 repetition range, right? So it's more of a myofibrillar hypertrophy that they're going for because they want to rip down those myofibers. This is going to make you really sore, but it is going to shape your body. Then beyond that endurance range, you just the pump, quote unquote. You're actually delivering oxygen and nutrients into those muscles because that's what a pump is. The more blood flow that you can get, the better. It does more when you have more nutrients and things being delivered in there. So all of these things are different ways of educating your nervous system as well as your muscular system. And remember, the more muscle that you have, to a point, the more metabolically healthy you're going to be when it comes to that insulin sensitivity, as well as that resting metabolic rate. It's going to go up a bit if you have more muscle mass as well. So you can actually stay leaner and in a healthier body fat range just by virtue of having more muscles. They need to get fed.
Right. I read a study not too long ago in JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, and guys that can do 10 push-ups or less have a very high risk of heart attack. So if you do 40 push-ups or more, statistically, you're far less risk, and actually, it's protective. I just happened to be at a buddy's gym the other day doing one of his annual, group fitness challenges. I'm happy to report I was able to do 59 push-ups in a minute. And it's no easy task. and some of the numbers, let's talk to some of the numbers that we want to achieve. So we talk about this ambiguous, like grow muscle, get leaner, and exercise, and all the excellent reasons we want to. But let's talk really quickly about knowing numbers before we flip over to supplements, ingredients, and how we can maybe manage genetic expression through the use of some of these nutraceuticals, hormones, botanicals, maybe. Let's start by abolishing BMI. And for that matter, let's start even before that by abolishing the notion that you jump on the scale and that's as much of health at all. Forget this. It might be once you know some of these other numbers, the scale might be sort of a surrogate marker. I don't recommend standing on it very frequently. I certainly don't recommend, if any women listening in tonight, that you bother much with it unless you really know your cycle effectively, because you're retaining water at some parts of the month, moon cycle, etc. BMI, basal metabolic, index is really the notion that through height and weight somehow we can infer health, very, very loosely. But BMR, the number of calories required so your body's functioning, particularly at rest, is calculated using formulas like the Harris-Benedict equation, much more intact. So male of 5'10", 180 pounds average, or female 5'6", 140 pounds. These formulas provide this sort of estimation. But again, remember, actual caloric needs are varied, based on activity level, muscle mass, DNA, other factors. I encourage everyone to get a DEXA, lean to fat ratio. So DEXA is a dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. So this is a scan that looks at the body, the whole body, or under this very minimal X-ray exposure, looking at composition, including lean mass, fat mass. So there is not a one size fits all. We look at the genetics and we have these kinds of numbers. That's where earlier on I was talking about, men 10 to 20%, women 18 to 28%. Why do women carry more fat tissue, by the way, percentage wise? Well, because it is not only evolutionary, for them, survivalistic. They're, typically childbearing. And that's what the intention is for, carrying more of a percentage in their breast tissue, hips, which grows during pregnancy, and it's essential to, provide the milk that feeds the baby, et cetera, and even estrogen, feeding. But these obviously ranges, these various with fitness level, as we kind of alluded to, and a bunch of other factors. But the number one, and that's sort of technological, stuff. The number one, I think, number that everyone should know that actually doesn't involve standing on a scale or doing any scan at all. It is the hip to waist ratio. It's a simple measure to assess the distribution of fat around the waist compared to the hips. And this the literature supports as an indicator for certain risk health, factors, health conditions like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes. We've been talking about the reason why you want to exercise. Here it is. Men need a waist to hip ratio of approximately zero 0.9 or less, right? With insert. Women about 0.85 more or less. It's easy to measure your hips, which is the peak of where your hip bones are going to be, against your waist, which is essentially around the umbilicus or at the same level as your belly button. So looking at BMR, which is your metabolism, and we do that. We look at UCP genes. We can understand some people have a better resting metabolism than others. And if yours is somewhat sluggish, we teach you how to sort of enhance that. And we'll get into some ingredients next. DEXA scan, if you can get to one or afford one. But monitoring hip to waist ratio is such an easy at-home measurement that, essentially tracks what it is, or the end game of where you're essentially trying to get to through exercise. You agree?
Yeah, I agree. And I think it can also be an indicator of cortisol dominance. Like let's say you're in like a really stressed period of your life, or you're not sleeping well for a couple weeks or whatever. Your body will actually partition things a little bit differently and make sure that it's protecting your internal organs. So it tends to send a little bit of additional, water storage or what have you into that area. So I actually pay attention to that, because if it changes, if I'm in a pretty, whatever, I might get a week where I just have bad sleep for whatever reason, noises in the middle of the night and stuff. And there's actually something different, like my body will actually change in response to that. So I equate that to the cortisol, but definitely a general health metric. I think that's great. You can kind of eyeball it. You don't really have to share it with anybody. You can just kind of keep an eye on it. Beyond that, there's also, for males, I think there's also a shoulder to waist ratio, right, to consider. In bodybuilding, they do something called vacuums. And this is actually in the Arnold Schwarzenegger. He wrote a big, thick book called the Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding. And he talks about these vacuums. So what you do is you actually suck the stomach up under the rib cage, and you do like sets of it. So you pull it in as far as you can go with all your air exhaled. And over time, you can actually change it. So I'll do that 3 times a day. I'll do like sets of 15 seconds just when I have a minute. And you pull it in, and it can actually over time start to change the aesthetics, right? Which is an interesting little toolkit kind of thing to do. It's free to do, and it's a ton of bodybuilders do that who don't naturally have those tight waists. It takes some consistency, but it is actually one of those tricks. So much of bodybuilding is actually trickery. It's making it look a particular way. So stomach vacuums, look that up if you have a poor ratio that you want to tackle.
And this also lends into the notion of diaphragmatic excursion. I think this is really an understudied area of health. Through exercise, we are improving the ability of the big muscle that basically allows us to inspire. And most of us, because of sedentariness and lack of exercise and control over certain muscles involved in breathing, don't really have the ability to bring the big diaphragm muscle down, or that excursion, the ability to lower it into the lower abdominal cavity and massage the organs and the lymph, the gulp down there, and actually get a full inspiration. I mean, breath work is part of health, and not just from the cognitive perspective, but for oxygenation and SpO2. So inspiration and training that one muscle, which is what made me think about it when you're talking about the vacuum. Training that muscle, even sitting at your desk doing breath work is part and parcel to good health and exercise. Let's get into some of the supplements, and of course some of the ingredients that we use at the DNA company, and why, especially as it relates to sort of certain findings, certain individuals, customizing and tailoring interventions to them. Andrew comments that there's a company that sells urolithin A, but it's very expensive. And are there knockoff or cheaper brands? Urolithin is an interesting one. Let's talk about this one. Pomegranates, I used to drink pomegranate extract or powder. And we know about this as it pertains to cardiovascular benefits and prostate health. But then we started learning about, how it supports the microbiome. There's in fact, the healthier of us, the healthier microbiomes of the world upon exposure. Some of these bugs, these good bugs, commensal bacteria just happen to like pomegranates. And they produce this urolithin A from the pomegranates. But a large part of us, and we study the microbiome at the DNA company through Gut 360 and other ways in which we look at genes, but some of us don't produce much urolithin A at all. So anyways, there's a company out there that basically discovered the extract from pomegranate and the ability to give this an ingredient form or supplement form. Share with us, and the rest, that maybe Andrew knows this already, but what is the urolithin A doing? Speaking, of course, back to what we're talking about in terms of the mitochondria.
Yeah, urolithin A is an interesting one, and I've used it off and on for a bit now. It's technically what's called a postbiotic, right? So it's kind of a metabolite that gets created in there. And you're absolutely right that it does come from pomegranates, but only about, I think, 20 to 30% of people have the right microbiome makeup to create urolithin A out of the eating of pomegranates. And if you don't have that, you could eat a friggin' dump truck full of pomegranates. You're not going to get 1 gram of urolithin A. 1 gram is actually a fair amount. You're not going to get 1 microgram of urolithin A, right? So that the company that I utilize is likely the same one you mentioned there, Timeline Nutrition. They created one called MitoPure. To my knowledge, I have yet to see any knockoffs of it.
There are some
because it's
out
kind
there,
of a
but
patented
they're not
process that they
worthy.
use. But right. And what it does is, I mentioned earlier, mitophagy, right? In response to the mitochondria and what it does, urolithin A directly causes mitophagy. So, I mean, this is a tremendous anti-aging ingredient, and they did their share of studies on different athletes and different things as well to talk about the performance aspects. So, on Timeline's website, there's some great information to look at with that. But it's going to have a direct anti-aging effect. It's going to have a direct performance effect. It's also great for the microbiome. I use it for the mitochondrial side of things because in my genes, I don't have a very good SOD2 pathway, right? So I tackle anything mitochondria related, and I also work out more than the daily recommended dose. I talked earlier about performance versus longevity. I go a little too far in the performance end personally. So I have to put a few interventions in place, and that's one of them.
So not just understanding your genes, another good example as to how we customize or personalize approaches. It's not just understanding the DNA, but also one's lifestyle goals included. But what are they doing now? Do we need some sort of help to sweep up the free radical or oxidative stress mess left behind? So let's unpack that for a second. SOD2, you mentioned, it's a gene we look at, superoxide dismutase, that essentially makes or manufactures the very enzyme that produces the protection against the mitochondria. In this case, mitochondria get bombarded by cellular respiration and oxidation just by living, breathing, and exercising. Of course, we're producing more of these. Some of us have variations to the SOD2 gene that don't allow us to be able to, it's a manganese-driven gene, allow us to be able to sweep up that oxidative stress mess left behind from day-to-day metabolism. So, and then the whole concept again around mitophagy, we want the older, more used up mitochondria to die off at the right time and get them out of there so that new ones can replicate, because they replicate to manufacture the optimal amount of ATP, the currency of energy in our body. So there's the protective side of it, help protect them. There's the side of it that, we want them to replicate. We want the old ones out, the new ones in, and we want them producing as much ATP as possible. So urolithin A is part of that story. But we also revere very highly ubiquinol, one of the best studied, ubiquinone or ubiquinol, in this case, a reduced form of coenzyme Q10 to protect the mitochondria. We often, if there's a SOD2 issue genetically, recommend a little bit more manganese rather. Then we also recommend PQQ, pyroquinone quinine. This is an ingredient that science shows helps replicate or divide the mitochondria. Again, out with the old, in with the new. And then to that, we like the literature around NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide. Some decent, if you stop, you talk to David Sinclair and he's going to talk to you about NMN. You talk to Charles Brenner, he's going to talk to you about nicotinamide riboside. But these will help the mitochondria produce more, of course, of that ATP. And guess what? After that whole long-winded sort of explanation of the SOD2 gene and how we might approach those like you with the SOD2 variation that's, let's say, unfavorable, there's nothing better than exercise itself, right?
Yeah, definitely. I
You
mean,
could
that's like
train,
I
or you
mentioned
can
earlier.
train your SOD2 gene essentially through exercise to behave in a way, more effectively. Can you not?
Yeah, and the more mitochondria you have in the first place, right? Of course, the more effective that's going to be. And the only thing that I have to say is, if we're going to do a lot of cardiovascular exercise, we just have to address the other side of that, the free radical buildup. If you have the T allele in SOD2, and if it doesn't line up with another gene called GPX, that's when we have to add in the hydrogen waters and the various things to help kind of increase that clearance. But absolutely, I mean, exercise directly increases mitochondria. The more we have, the better we age, just like we said.
When we see an otherwise estrogenized male, and again, I'm one of them, describe what that means in the hormonal pathway, and then talk to us about some of the, ingredients, dietary strategies that we might want to supersede or help to manage that better. What are we doing?
Yeah, so there's a couple of moving parts there, right? Because if we're estrogen dominant, that's going to indicate that we're dominant in the first place. And this is something to bear in mind. If we're dominant, we call a dominant profile one that makes a lot of testosterone off of progesterone. That's the first step of the steroidogenesis pathway. So just bear in mind here, I'm also an estrogen dominant male. So both of us are. That means we're making a lot of testosterone, but later in the pathway, it's aromatizing, right? Too much of it is steering towards aromatization and estrogen. So, what are we going to do about that? Well, hey, we know that we make a lot of testosterone right off the gate. It's later in the pathway. So, firstly, we have to consider any factor in our lives that is increasing that aromatization. Excess body fat aromatizes, microplastics, toxins, endocrine disruptors in our personal care products. All of these things are part of that conversation that I'm going to have. But lifestyle wise, there's ways that we can kind of tip the scales toward androgenization to get us a little bit more of those kind of, let's call them masculine benefits, and steer it a little bit more towards that. So I might recommend intermittent fasting, compound weightlifting, getting enough sunshine, right? Vitamin D matters a ton there. The breath work, all of these different things are actually going to matter as far as kind of creating that homeostasis in the body. We may want to look at later how many estrogen related toxins your body makes as well, because you may want to utilize DIM, sulforaphane, I3C, some of these ingredients to kind of counteract toxic estrogen metabolites. Beyond that, I'll also use, and I know we're dying to get into some ingredients here as well, Tonkat Ali, Fidogia agrestis, Tribulus extract, fenugreek, the basic micronutrients, zinc. There's so
Horny
many
goat
things that
weed.
matter. Horny goat weed. Let's talk about that,
I just love
right?
that name.
Yeah,
I mean, there's some, that's, I would call that C-level science, but I'm a huge fan, as you are, of Tribulus, that's for sure. And I just got to interject here, because as you're describing all these things that are very much within the hormonal pathway and how to sort of tweak and turn the dials up for, androgenicity if one is estrogenized, or maybe down, if one is hyper androgenized, because there's obviously side effects to that in the long term. But Marissa's bringing up a really good point. First of all, she's asking, are genes specific to what make us more cardio, or more weight focused. Yes, that's kind of what we're talking about here. You definitely have certain profiles that you want to focus more, as you're describing right now. Fill their schedule up with a little more weight dominant routine versus cardio routine. But then she asks, really astutely, any place for citrus pectin? So, despite all kinds of health benefits from citrus pectin, modified citrus pectin, you know, there's really no good evidence on muscle growth, strength gains, or really athletic performance. But if detoxification is impaired, right, as we talk about all the time, an individual who's otherwise even androgenized as a male, very easy to put on muscle mass, but their detox pathways are terrible, they're going to have problems. Heavy metals accumulate, endogenous or toxins that sort of simply build up, that you're making on your own on a day-to-day basis. You don't recover as efficiently. We look at the whole glutathionization pathway. MCP is amazing at removing heavy metals and toxins from the body. So if that's the issue, the individual personal scenario is that they don't detoxify effectively, it's not so much the hormones, then by helping them remove toxins by using MCP might be an approach. There's also evidence that it can boost, immune system and manage inflammation. So if somebody's problem is more that they're sort of generally more pro-inflamed or predisposed to be pro-inflamed all the time, that's not a scenario where it's favorable for the muscles at the microscopic level to break down and purposely and then repair as efficiently or as effectively. So yes, all of these things play a role. What are your hormones? Not in the moment. That's important to know your numbers and check your hormones on a routine basis, snapshot of right now, what's happening. But genetically, are you more as a male predisposed to being estrogenized, androgenized, somewhere in the middle? How do you detoxify? We haven't even got there, but methylation, some of the micronutrients, the vitamin D. We look at all of these different things as they play a role to how well certain ways of exercising, or let's call it what ways of exercising are most indicated for you. Guys, we highly encourage you to, if you're listening in, ask questions. What herbs? We mentioned some herbs. Maybe just list those again for some of the folks that are asking specifically. So, and what they might do. You mentioned Tongat Ali. You mentioned tribulus. We talk about ashwagandha. That's immune modulatory and has other impacts on inflammation, et cetera. But just list those herbs that you said you liked. Just a repeat.
Yeah, so Fedogia agrestis is one, and that's a difficult one to spell. So B, I hope that I'm not overloading you here with difficult things, because a lot of these are the scientific names for these plants. So yeah, Fedogia agrestis is great. Tribulus extract, like you mentioned, Bryce. Tribulus, fenugreek. There was one more that I mentioned, Tonkat Ali. All of these operate on the androgen pathway, right? So they can increase the actual bioavailability of androgens in your body. And there's actually one product that I've found worked really well for me from a company called Level Up Health, LVLUP Health. And it's created by this Australian naturopath, super knowledgeable guy about peptides and all these things. He made a product called Botanabolic. And it's got a number of these things in there, as well as creatine precursors. It does have that epicatogen product in there too that I mentioned, which is the myostatin inhibitor. So that's been one of the better ones that I've found as far as the inclusion of a bunch of these different things. I'm also a fan of maca. It's I think a lot of the evidence is a little bit more anecdotal with regard to maca. But yeah, immune system properties and libido enhancing properties, nitric oxide enhancing properties are all there. So that's another great one. I also think Shilajit is one of those ones that shouldn't be overlooked, because we can talk about these exotic herbs. If we don't have the baseline mineral content that we need to create these hormones, we got to start there first. So yeah, minerals from our friends at Beam or Shilajit, those are always great places to start as well.
Speaking of which, getting back to the basics, non-specific to the tailored, customized approach that we take, given your hormone pathway, your detoxability, methylation, types of activity and exercise that are more, specific to you, given the cardiovascular element of things. I'm a huge believer in the basics, as you've mentioned some of them. I think certain supplements like creatine, taken the right way, it's not a bulker. It's not going to cause you to retain water in other parts and tissues, and it's going to basically allow you to lift heavier weights, especially in the beginning. There's strategies around this, widely available, evidence-based stuff. So, creatine, omega-3 fatty acids. I mean, these are things that everyone should be thinking about, regardless as to their genetic susceptibilities. Huge fan of HMB. And, just the way that urolithin A is sort of proprietary to Timeline. As a group out there, TSI, that manufactures like the evidence-based ingredient called MyHMB. And HMB, or, this which is basically just a downstream byproduct of leucine, branched chain amino acid, and many of us are deficient. We don't get enough in our diets. And this beta hydroxy beta methylbutyrate, or HMB for short, helps to prevent loss of muscle. So I think, all that we're talking about so far is how do we gain it? How do we customize towards, putting it on in the right fashion and maintaining it? Prevention of loss is a big part of the game. And the science around HMB is not just compelling. It's pretty much concrete now. So I think everyone should supplement with that, regardless as to what your genetics suggest susceptibility. And then we've also talked about this in previous discussions. Peak ATP. It used to be that we couldn't supplement with ATP. That made no sense. You don't get ATP from diet, and you can't supplement with it. But they've cracked the code on this disodium ATP supplement that you can ingest and actually upregulate, the science shows, just prior to activity, ATP downstream. So again, mitochondria do that for us. They make it ready. But what if you get a little bump? What if you could support the mitochondrial function? Said, I'm not sure if we should actually be mentioning names. I'm sorry if I, but it's talking about, benign prostate, hypertrophy. The question is this a sign of being estrogenized? And which one of the gene variations would be maybe doing this, and how to deal with this? So it's an amazing question, because it actually speaks to how we're looking at gene pathways. So whether you're XX or XY, born male or female, right? We all take cholesterol, the master precursor to the steroidal hormone pathways, and we make pregnenolone and DHEA, and then progesterone, and then testosterone and estrogen, and DHT, and all these different things. The genes we look at literally are those that decide whether you're very efficient at that very specific part in time when one hormone turns into the next. So from progesterone into testosterone, the speed at which you do that factors in to predisposition of BPH. And then how you take testosterone and make DHT. And then, of course, how you take testosterone and make estrogen, and what you do with that downstream. And then, of course, how you clear testosterone through the glucuronidization genes you were talking about earlier. All this factors into exercise, muscle mass, et cetera. So let's paint the picture of a very androgenized male. This individual is going to produce progesterone into testosterone very efficiently, quickly, if you will. Then they'll take that and turn testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, DHT, very quickly. And then they often will have a genetic aptitude to retain that. The glucuronidization clearance of testosterone is perhaps slow. They've got a lot of androgen receptors. We look at that factors in heavily here as well. So they make a lot of DHT, a lot of testosterone, but don't clear it as efficiently. And estrogen downstream is working at a, let's say, moderate or slow clip as well. So they retain all that testosterone. These guys are what we call phenotypically. You look at them and they're most often bald at a very early age. They're striated, they're ripped. They go to the gym maybe twice a week, and they can achieve that and maintain it. That's the testosterone, androgenized, right? They are more predisposed to prostate hypertrophy and hyperplasia and prostate problems, because what feeds into that, as we know, is testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. So it's the opposite. It's the more, as we've already been open about, Justin and myself, more estrogenized males that have in the literature the lesser risk factors for prostate hyperplasia and even cancers. So that's how that works. But we got to work harder in the gym in order to achieve our muscle mass and get the the output of muscle and the retention of muscle over the longer term. So there's no such thing as the best genes, right? There's just what we have, and by knowing is empowering to know exactly where the focus should be. Anything to add to that?
No, I think you nailed it. Honestly, what I always say too is that there's it's like you said, there's no perfect set of genes, and if you have like a balanced profile, there's going to be some downstream consequences as far as your ability to put on muscle because you're not making a ton of testosterone in the first place. But the good news is that you're also way less at risk for any hormone related, inflammatory toxic issues, right? So hormones are very powerful. They shout their signal at the body. So they do some good, they can also do some bad. So what we do here is we take what we know and we amplify the good and we do our best to mitigate the bad to get you the best case scenario out of what your genomic kind of layout is. So don't be depressed about it, right? It's just this is what we have to work with. We're going to amplify the good.
Couple of other questions. One, yes, we mentioned sexual health earlier. Studies that show lack of physical fitness related to men's sexual health dysfunction. Oh my gosh, there's so much literature. I know there was a study. Uh, I think it was the American Journal of Cardiology for sure. They published a number, but found men that physically active had much lower risk of developing erectile dysfunction, and that's a huge body of evidence there. There's aerobic exercises like running and swimming, very effective in improving ED and even just libido. And so the whole notion around how exercise simply improves mood, right? Behavior, cognition. The other question around Alzheimer's, somebody suggesting, I know it's born in the gut, but what part of fitness being active plays in potentially developing it. The literature is just becoming more and more flooded with this whole notion that, again, the muscles are the forgotten or maybe even just recently discovered organ of longevity. And because they are the metabolic sink for what otherwise, when not used, is toxic to the brain, primarily sugar. When insulin is not sensitive, drawing sugar into the cells, nerve cells, muscle cells, primarily, then it's toxic to the brain. It instigates an immune response that's not favorable. You become sort of this pro-inflammatory soup. So engaging the muscles, getting active, this will stave off Alzheimer's through this so you talked about it the other day. I think it was you, Justin, that we have to be reminded, or maybe it's just today, that we're talking about cognitive decline in Alzheimer's and even Parkinson's as type 3 diabetes, right?
Yep,
A little bit more on
absolutely.
that, and even some of the genes that we look at that sort of give us some insights.
Yeah, and there is such a direct correlation between exercise and libido because your hormones really they're signals. There's these signals that we send to our body via the activities that we provide. And in primal, I always talk about I call it like warrior signals, which is a little bit cheesy, but we have to understand how is our body reacting to the environmental stimulus that we're giving it. If we tell our body that this is what we do, we sit in an office and we look at blue light and we eat inflammatory processed carbohydrates and we don't move our body and we're depressed and we're anxious and then we go on social media and we wire our dopamine pathways for something negative, why would our body want us to procreate in an environment like that? Right? Bearing in mind that up until very recently in human history, that was not our experience, right? If we take that guy and then we get him grounded and sun exposure and breathing and getting hot and getting cold and lifting heavy things and eating plants and animals, low toxins, your body's going to react very differently, right? So always ask yourself the question, why would my body want me to bring offspring into this environment? If your body suspects that it's a toxic environment, it doesn't want you bringing offspring into it. So this is an ancient system where we want to carry on our species. The more toxic your lifestyle, the less your hormones are going to reward you, right? Testosterone is a reward for weightlifting and having high quality nutrients and all these different things because the healthier my body is, the more my body wants me to pass on my genes. So
Right.
that's how I look at that whole conversation.
And ample studies have, demonstrated that regular physical activity leads to these epigenetic changes that enhance this muscle adaptation and fat metabolism, which is what you're speaking to. And that also, good news, it's never too late, right? Cutting edge research on muscle memory, and that is the idea that's very fascinating area of study showing that muscles can essentially remember previous training experiences. So, and that doesn't mean that you've had to have been working out or training hard since your early teens, but you know these experiences can expedite the regaining of muscle mass after periods of inactivity. So, these are profound implications for training strategies, in particular, by the way, after injuries and surgery. So, this brings up the notion, reminds me of the idea that if you're somehow incapacitated or limited to what you're doing, let's say you have a bung knee or you've sprained your ankle, there are other parts of your body that you can train and train pretty hard, such, for example, chest or some biceps, isolate them. So then what happens? We talked about this earlier at the microscopic level, there's tears, there's injury purposefully done that, strategically you can learn how to, optimize through understanding your DNA. But these particular microscopic tears are then fixed. The body heals them and you grow. And when you grow and you have better, stronger muscles, you're metabolically more enhanced on all levels, better sugar metabolism, better overall energy, better cognition, staving off disease. But when you're tearing that muscle in your chest or your bicep, those same healing hormones and other anti-inflammatory, peptides and so forth are going to be going and addressing your knee or your ankle or whatever else might be ailing you. So, this whole concept of, I have an injury and I can't exercise, that's also out the window. There's always something that you can do, right?
Yeah, because you're just trying to trigger that hormesis, right? As long as you give your body some reason to amplify these anabolic hormones, once they're amplified, it's going to circulate and it's going to do its job. Peptides, they're very intelligent. They know where to go, right? And I always I can use this analogy because I had a friend who had competed in bodybuilding, and that was his life, man. I mean, he was a bodybuilder, and for reasons I won't get into, he had to get his tricep surgically removed. You can imagine how devastating that is to a career weightlifter to have one of your main muscles
Sure.
associated with pushing removed. And he was very depressed about it. And I had seen him in the gym months later, right? And he was just kind of getting going again, and his mind was all over the place. And I said, "Man, I'm jealous of you." And he's like, "What?" And I said, "I'm jealous because you're about to have the best legs in this whole gym." Right? I said, "You're going to have the biggest and the strongest legs." And that was my advice to him. I said, "You do what you can. You take what God gives you, and you just smash forward anyway." I said, "You're squat every day, man. Get those lunges on. Let's build your legs and get those androgen receptors activated. That tricep isn't going to matter anymore because the other 90% of your body, that's where you can put the attention on." So yeah, I mean, you hurt your knee, you got arms, don't you? You hurt your wrist, you got quadriceps, don't you? Right? Let's strip it down and do what we can still, because the body has to move regardless.
Right. I love this question. If you're currently sedentary, and many of us are, with genes that say you should be doing less cardio, where should I start? Asks this individual. What's the best way to start out of the gate to win and make the best impact on your overall health? I mean, that's the conundrum for most of us. So let's just even paint this archetype picture here. This individual is already sedentary for whatever reason. They are potentially estrogen, dominant. It's hard for them to put on muscle mass. Cardio profiles suggest they got to be careful with too much cardiovascular activity. And perhaps maybe they also have, as many do, some challenges with detoxification and methylation from a diet, lifestyle, as well as ingredient supplemental perspective. Where would you start this person?
So this is where understanding your reports is of a ton of value. And I have to say, getting into programs is very useful, right? Because we can really detail exactly why. if you're suboptimal in these areas, we need to know why. Is it the 9p21? And do you just not use cholesterol very well to heal your endothelium? Are your endothelium too thin to where there's too much damage that accumulates there? Or is it more so on that SOD2 pathway? And is it a mitochondrial toxin problem? If we know what the problem truly is, then we can reinforce that area. Maybe you have suboptimal NOS3 gene and you're not going to be able to circulate and create nitric oxide very well, to where we would use something like, let's say, Cardio Miracle, for example, which I'm a huge fan of, right? Deliver some anti-inflammatory nutrients to the endothelium so we can heal them up. So know what part of the report that's talking about, because our reports are made on an algorithm, and sometimes context goes a long way with that. That's really also going to be more so in response to higher intensity cardio. I don't see a reason why people can't even start just by going for a walk, right? It's more anabolic. It's high volume, but it's low intensity. There's not going to be a lot of damage at the level of the endothelium. And you can argue it's almost anabolic, right? And you're right. You can incline that nice and easily to dabble in the intensity without it being a hit workout, right? So I think everybody should be on some kind of stretching protocol. That's getting after it. That's time into your body. Go for a walk, do some breath work, start where it starts, and then just dabble in even some body weight resistance training. Can you do some push-ups? Can you do some body weight squats? We start where it starts. We meet you where you are, and then we just create the protocol from there.
You mentioned programs. I want to make sure everyone understands. We run the testing, the DNA 360, and we offer up all kinds of clinical supervision. You're one of our master clinical clinicians. And, we can put this link up for people who haven't already been exposed to this notion. We're also still offering a discount right now for the DNA 360 testing. And it is for a spring discount. So all caps spring 15 for 15% off of our DNA 360 testing. We had a very specific question about atrial fibrillation just now that I want to address, but I just want to throw there a very practical example sort of schedule in the week of for anyone who's just looking to get started. Ready? Here's how it goes. So Monday, maybe think about 30 minutes of a brisk walk. And then doing, 10 or 15 minutes of upper body weightlifting. Tuesday, 30 minutes of cycling at a moderate pace. Wednesday, some yoga, stretching for flexibility, maybe engage in some balance exercises. Thursday, 30 minutes jogging, weightlifting, lower body, again, 15 minutes. Friday, 30 minutes of brisk walking and again, some stretching. Saturday, some kind of active recreational activity like hiking or playing sports. And then Sunday, you rest. You have a day off or maybe some gentle stretching to recover. And I want to emphasize that's the bare minimum that we should all be doing, right? Just for general health. Then you get your DNA tested and you know what your Achilles heels, if you will, and or areas of focus should be and start to tailor or build upon that schedule for you. But improving cardiovascular stamina and strength and reducing symptoms and overall quality of health for somebody with atrial fibrillation when the atrium of the heart, the upper chambers quiver, where the ventricles are pushing blood out to the body, get these sort of irregular heartbeats. You always want to be supervised, but exercise, supervised, medically prescribed exercise, is one of the best things for it. And I can tell you, it's sedentariness that actually exacerbates AFib. You'd be shocked to learn. So there's a fine line. You always want supervision. Should we reiterate the fact that you shouldn't start any supplement or dietary and nutritional protocol without speaking to your doctor or healthcare provider, obviously, ever. But I found incredible success by incorporating with AFib arginine, B6, and you got to talk about dosages with your pharmacist or doctor, and magnesium. These three things help a lot of folks with atrial fibrillation from a supplemental nutraceutical perspective. We're coming up to the 90-minute mark, and we talked about a lot, the whole evolutionary perspective, obviously the genetic, customized, personalized routine, and how to better understand all that, some of the ingredients that we might apply to wash over our genetic aptitude and improve it. the centenarian Olympics, if you will, getting to 100 or beyond and working your way back. If you want to be there, if you want to have a life without, major risk of injury and be able to lift your groceries, climb up a couple of flights of stairs and maybe play with your grandchildren, it's no longer a question of do we think we're going to be living to 100 and beyond, because we will. Right? Medicine's at that point where, it's amazing at keeping people alive. But this is the question of health span. Do you want that muscle mass in order to get yourself to the point of high quality of life for those 120 years? Or do you want to live in frailty? And I think the answer for most of us is we want to live with that additional health span. And how you get there is through exercise and building up your muscle resilience and building up your mitochondrial reserves. And the way you're going to know how to do that best for you, N of one, is to have your DNA tested. And like you said, potentially even go through a program, right? To get that real customization routine, balance the hormones, get the metabolism revved up, et cetera. So let folks know how they can, get into your schedule. Justin, where do they go?
Yeah, so I'm on the in-house clinician team, right, for the DNA company. So I orchestrate pretty much all of the programs. I'm part of that team, regardless of what tier you would go for. You can actually request me. So let's say fitness is one of your bigger priorities, right? Or if you're one of these people who really just wants to amplify physical performance, you could do any one of those three main tiers of the program, and you can actually request me, and we can get after it that way. I'm also available for just one-off consults as well. Let's say you have a handful of questions about your report, but other than that, you're doing great health-wise, to where you don't want to invest in one of the bigger programs. We can still have a one-on-one conversation for either 30 or 45 minutes. It's all available on the DNA company website there, and I'd be more than happy to dive in with each and every one of you.
Awesome. All right, brother. Do we miss anything? Final thoughts before we call it a night, and maybe get the hour or two of exercise in that we know we need? I know we already did ours, but we got to let people out there have a chance to get that done.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this directly embodies that momentum game I always talk about. Fitness is very much like that. The more sedentary we are, we're stacking L's, right? I talk about getting W's as opposed to L's. Every workout that you do and every positive decision you make is a win. So start stacking them up now. We have to be in alignment with the end result that we want, right? So when it comes to identifying your goal, picture that 10.0 self, picture the best possible you. Then I can help you to kind of figure out the protocols to get there, but be in alignment with your assignment. That's what we're doing today. Be your best version of yourself possible for everybody around you.
Couldn't agree with you more. Obviously, we have looked at a huge landscape of the confluence of genetics, lifestyle, technology that reshapes this sort of whole approach to physical fitness by delving into this whole lifestyle and genetic approach to fitness and exercise. And I hope that everyone out there, does get involved in a more personalized approach to their health, because it's the playbook of life. It is your instruction manual, insights from genetic data, not only refine our understanding, but also empower us to make these informed decisions that enhance our health outcomes. That's it. Bottom line, you can't change your DNA. You're born with what mom and dad have given you, but you can manage genetic expression. And then embracing all these technologies and knowing your numbers and lab tests and everything else that comes along with this, ingredients and so forth. This allows you to break free from this one size fits all solution and move towards a truly personalized health optimization. So we are now going to sign off, and we wish you all the best in health and wellness, and get at them, as Justin likes to say. Just get at it, right?
And man up, whatever you do.
That's right. Till next time, folks. Thanks so much for joining. We'll talk soon.